Hi, everyone, and welcome to the WSBA Crypto Roundup for December 22nd, 2023. I'm Josh Klayman, and I'm here with my amazing co-hosts, Ron Quaranta and David Brill. Before we begin, please keep in mind that nothing discussed today should be considered accounting, investment, legal, or tax advice, and the opinions expressed are our own and may not represent the views of our respective firms. Hi, Ron and David. How are you?
Hey Josh, good to see you. How are you? You were missed last week. You were jetting around, as I recall.
Yeah, I mean it's always something, but I know the roundup was in good hands with the two of you and with our special guest host. So, yes.
Yeah, and great. Hello to everybody from Florida. Very glad to be here for the last week of the year.
I want to share with the audience and everyone on LinkedIn and Twitter. Please submit questions in the chat. David took the opportunity to pivot around and give me the beach view that he has from the compound in Florida. Josh,
Tough life, David Brill.
We all work hard. We should enjoy the fruits of it.
Exactly. And it's hard to believe, but we're nearly at the end of 2023. There's so much I want to ask you guys. There's so much going around in the market and so many, I would say, changes and sort of exciting events and trends. So, without giving investment advice or anything approaching that, I would love to hear your thoughts about what's happening, frankly, with prices and with market action. What are we seeing? Why are we seeing it now?
So it's really interesting. We've been talking about an ETF in Bitcoin, 7, 8 years now, and there's a real consensus that its, arrival is shortly coming. It would be a cash settled ETF, which I think isn't exactly what everybody would like. I think people would like, an in-kind offering, but I think the consensus is that in the next couple of weeks, we're going to see one approved, maybe early January in this, January 5th to January 10th window. And so what are people doing? A lot of people have reached out to me and said, well, should we buy before this comes out, or should we, again, not giving them investment advice, but just directionally, what are my thoughts? And so, one of the things I'm, thinking about is I feel like the people who are non-crypto native people are going to wait for the ETF and will prefer purchasing it through that wrapper. Whereas people who are comfortable using crypto exchanges will be buying Bitcoin on spot exchanges or through DeFi. So I think what you're seeing is there's really a mix of people wanting exposure to the space and sort of wanting to get ahead of the ETF, getting approved. And then, there's this other cohort of people who are just waiting to see, when it gets approved and when they can buy it through the traditional brokerage account. So a couple of levels I'm paying attention to is we've been hovering around 44,000 on BTC. So I'm really curious to see if we kind of break through maybe 45,500 and go up to 48,000. If we start selling off and going below 42 and maybe 40, do we sell off into the 30s? And so I don't think we'll see a dramatic move downwards until the ETF's approved. But I think there's also this opportunity for things to really accelerate after it's approved. So it's a very interesting dynamic. Josh, you mentioned to me in our pre-call that when the futures were approved, and you and I were, and Ron were aware of this, that literally I think the day the futures were approved was the high-end Bitcoin for a long period of time, and then it sold off rather dramatically. And in that case, it was different because people now had the ability to short Bitcoin that they didn't have previously. Here, I feel like some people may short the ETF, maybe more professional players will do that, but I don't think that's something retail people are waiting for the ETF to do. So I think there's an interesting dynamic in play. I do think there could be a little bit of, buy the news, sell the, I said that wrong, but like buy up to the news and then sell the news. There's a better way of saying that. It's
buy the rumor, sell the fact.
Yeah, buy the rumor, sell the fact. But, I have a feeling that there's going to be some follow through into the approval of the ETF. And then maybe a little bit after that, a sell off. But, we've seen some nice gains both in Bitcoin and the layer twos. Ethereum has really been pretty stagnant. And I think that could be a function of, there's been a reporting out there that Celsius has been selling a lot of Ethereum as part of their bankruptcy reorganization, or really liquidation at this point, or semi-liquidation, we'll call it. So that could be an overhang, and I think that was an overhang on Solana, because now that selling has stopped, Solana's really escalated and almost touched $100. So I know that was a lot to chew on, but hopefully I framed the issue of where we are and where we may be going.
Yeah, that's great. And Ron, chewing on what,
I will
out
chew
there.
on I will chew on that deep information, and I get the privilege of chatting with you and David regularly. So like David, I'm watching a lot of the price action. I think, David, this is a very interesting, and you mentioned it earlier. We've been talking about a Bitcoin ETF for years, but as the information begins to dribble out, it's not just the price action we look at, although that's important. I think it was yesterday, it posted on X, and informed sources noted that the SEC spoke to all ETF applicants about specifics. So when you begin to have the conversation about the granular aspects of what's an ETF going to do, how does it get registered, how does it get purchased, those are kind of the end game status items where this means it's real. We're going to potentially look at an ETF happening. And the other side of the conversation, David, and we've talked about this last week, I know the three of us have often spoken about it, an ETF is a very comfortable thing for a lot more people than crypto purists, right? It's easy for the three of us to say we're buying Bitcoin spot. We understand the mechanics of it. We've been in this space for almost a decade. Asking, my great aunt or something to buy Bitcoin is not an easy lift, but she knows what an ETF is. She knows that Fidelity can get her an ETF, and she understands there's a little fee, but it's safer in that regard. I think that opens up an entire wave of ETF applications in the future for different assets. And I think it opens up the RIA market when we look at registered investment advisors. And David, I know, again, we spoke about this last week. Thousands upon thousands of them will finally be able to say, oh, you've heard of Bitcoin. We can get you access to that. Fidelity is offering an ETF. Van Eyck is offering an ETF. And I think that's an important catalyst. I think that's the generational shift we often talk about. And Josh, you both know me well enough to know I'm not going to make a price prediction usually. I'm going to mirror something, David, that you said, talking about the price points. We're at 43,000 on BTC right now. The ETF launches, I think we will see a little bit of sell-off, just covering some of the options positions that we've seen in the marketplace. But I'm going to predict a new all-time high as we approach the halving. And David, you and I could figure out whether I owe you the steak dinner or vice versa.
Well, clearly being bullish, I don't want to be averse to you on that trade. But I think the one question I think we all have to think about a little bit is, so once an ETF's approved, how quickly will people actually be buying it? So that's one thing I think people haven't thought about, because even when the ETFs are approved, I mean, it's not like a whole bunch of RIAs are going to start picking up the phone and the next day be like, hey, it's approved, I'm going to buy you, 5% of your, whatever percent of your portfolio. But, how long will it sort of take to get to a place where, it filters down and the really non-pros in financial services are buying it? And that's one thing I'm curious about. The other thing is, will it show up in companies' retirement accounts as an option? And I think that could be really the bigger question, because, Grayscale's product's been so popular because that was really the only game in town people wanted to buy in their IRA or, in some sort of retirement account. So how quickly some of these products show up in people's retirement accounts may also account for how quickly, we see uptake of it.
David, isn't that a management decision, though? And Josh, just to chime in there for a second, you can imagine a MicroStrategy making a Bitcoin ETF available, and I'm not saying they are, but making it available to their employees. Some other organizations may not willingly want to do that. Do you see that? I mean, is that a challenge for us, I wonder?
I mean, look, I think, there are rules around what you can offer employees and things of that nature. And, I'd like to think once an ETF's approved that, the new product would fall within sort of those guidelines. But, it's something you have to be aware of.
Yeah.
I would venture to say that tech companies and other sort of, tech-forward companies would consider this first.
Yeah.
Maybe some traditional companies may hold off for a while. But I think all the mechanics of how long this takes and when we start really seeing volume and uptake will be really key to seeing how much of the sort of non-crypto native, money is going into this.
And
And
an approved bit. I'm sorry, Josh. Go ahead.
no, go ahead, Rob.
I was going to say there's a difference between a BTC ETF being approved and it being available, right? There are mechanics
Yeah,
that have to happen in the background for that.
yeah. And
So
also like how it trades a little bit. Is it going to be a little choppy trading at first or not? I think, look, some people may want to wait a few days and just sort of see the mechanics of it too.
I love seeing this energy between the two of you talking about this. So I'm just wondering, do you think we'll see hot on the heels of a Bitcoin spot ETF approval, other spot ETF approvals? Or is that something that's going to be further down the line?
Well, we've got the Ethereum ETF application that went in, but I wonder, from a mechanics perspective, David mentioned Ethereum a bit earlier on. I think they're running into gas fee issues as well in favor. That's why others are looking at other L1s. But it's a good question, Josh. Does that open the floodgate of why can't I get a Solana ETF or an Ethereum ETF?
Well, it's interesting, Josh. There's the SEC hasn't come out affirmatively and said that ETH isn't a security where they have with Bitcoin. So even though I think the majority of us think that ship has sailed and that the option, the ability to sort of like pivot on that has passed, even with the sort of change to proof of stake. So I guess the question is the commission really willing to just let it go and go towards another sort of approved wrapper in an ETF?
Hmm.
And I think maybe they wait a little bit and see how the BTC ETFs trade and, kind of just take it in. And, they have a mechanism to take, 240 days and sort of sit on things for a while. So I think maybe a little bit depends on how does the rollout of the BTC ETF go?
Makes sense. And speaking of the commission, certainly we've seen today an article on CoinDesk that's talking about Gary Gensler and his views, which I don't think anyone's surprised to hear, his views about the digital asset space and specifically citing that there's, quote, too much fraud and too many bankruptcies. Although I said quote, but it's not specifically a quote. Those words were used. What do we make of that? I mean, certainly there is the question of fraud is fraud, and across industries, any fraud is probably too much fraud. But what about bankruptcies? Do you think it's a really fair criticism of his to look at an early stage industry and say there are too many bankruptcies? What are your thoughts, guys?
All right, I'm going to weigh in, and you both know me, and you know where my opinion is going to be on some of this. Look, this is the standard SEC chair's playbook. It's got the trigger words that he puts out there that get those who support him on the Hill saying you're doing a great job, and his detractors frothing at the mouth and going to X to post all of their thoughts about him. I think it is a bit disingenuous to say there are too many bankruptcies, and you can make an argument. And again, I'm not taking this position, but certain of the actions or inactions of regulators might have precipitated some of these bankruptcies. And there's these conspiracy theories about why wasn't the SEC investigating FTX, et cetera. I think it harms a nascent industry more when you claim that there's too many bankruptcies and everyone's a fraudulent character. And it's a one-sided tale, and that doesn't help innovation at all. And Josh, to be clear, I'm not minimizing fraud is fraud. Bad actors should be taken off the table and justice should be done. But it's like, you joked about it once a few weeks ago. It's Groundhog Day all over again. It's the same speech to the same audiences.
And David, what do you think?
Look, absent the fraud, some of the bankruptcies in the space, have been painful for customers. And I don't think that he may be referring to them with the best intentions, but it is something that has to change. And I think the industry has evolved from that. But you can't just say that, because then you could look at 2008 and say, well, investment banking business, is fraudulent or hasn't evolved because Lehman Brothers and Bear Stearns failed.
Yeah.
So I think as we said, 2022 was sort of our crypto, Bear Stearns and Lehman Brothers moment, and I think we've learned from that. I think the lending practices have been reined in. I still think there's room to do lending in crypto. I don't think those are securities. That's a whole nother discussion. But that being said, I think some of the practices that led to that have been modified so that that won't happen again. And regarding fraud, there's fraud across everything.
Mm.
I think the one area I think is a little more concerning is I think we have to do a better job as an industry with technology, and like if we're rolling out new protocols, doing security audits and making sure, things are rolled out after they've been sort of battle tested a little bit. But, you know, it's unfortunate that these comments are made.
Makes sense. I mean, just thinking about what we're talking about with the bankruptcies, and earlier you noted about the views by some that some effects on price of certain tokens may relate to overhang in connection with bankruptcies and the expectation of what trustees in bankruptcy might sell off or otherwise.
Mm.
When do you think we'll be out of that overhang? Is that like mid 2024? Is that early 2024? Is that end of 2024 if you get out your crystal balls?
Well, I can't talk to FTX, but with Celsius, it seems from the public filings that they're still selling a lot of Ethereum. And they still have some holdings that they're working on liquidating. And you still have 3AC's holdings out there, which I think a lot of them are illiquid. So I mean, I think there's going to be some overhang for a while. It just seems like a lot of Ethereum has been sold, and a lot of Solana was being sold. And so I think that maybe Ethereum's price has been suppressed by all this ETH that's being sold, so that it can go into the hands of customers. But I will add one thing. I think that the SEC taking certain positions in these bankruptcies regarding the distribution of digital assets has not helped the matter.
Mm.
Taking the view that they only want to see Bitcoin and maybe Ethereum distributed and not the native tokens distributed back to customers has caused, customers potentially to have lost some of the, rising value here in the tokens.
David, just to pile on, I'm sorry, Josh, just to pile on that, one of the things I think is important is when we talk about this overhang, I do not envy the bankruptcy reorg teams like the team now running FTX. And David, you've explained this to me many times. Bankruptcy is a very complicated process, but it's not just the SEC either. I think we saw the news about a week ago where I believe it's the Internal Revenue Service claiming that FTX owes $24 billion in taxes, which would, by many measures, wipe out anything that customers would get back. And I'm not sure I'm smart enough to understand where that number comes from. But David, to your point, it's a very complicated process for some of these things.
Yeah, and if they had really made enough money to incur that much taxes, then where is all that money? Then these should be fully funded.
Yep.
So it's hard to understand how they got to where they got, and I imagine that's a placeholder number. But I mean, I would think as a matter of public policy that customers, should be put in front of fines and taxes and things like that. With the only caveat being like if members of the company that filed for bankruptcy, maybe their payments need to, be subordinate to any tax payments. But for non-employees of the company, it just seems really punitive to sort of take that approach.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I want to bring in here, apart from these bankruptcies, Ron, you mentioned the Hill, and I think
Yes.
there's a lot of really interesting things happening on the Hill, as always. As the three of us, as well as Dina Ellis Dina Ellis Rajkind, sorry, Dina, and others, I believe Adam Goldberg, but perhaps
Yep.
others, have talked about national security and this increased focus and lens through which regulators and legislators are looking at different technologies, including digital assets.
Yep.
One of the things that had been explained to me, which I hadn't really been familiar with before, was this idea that if you see, for example, a letter from, say, Elizabeth Warren to Gary Gensler, it's highly likely that perhaps Chair Gensler knew that that letter was coming.
Mm.
Right. And so that's one thing I had started to bear in mind, that maybe, when we see statement, like letters going to various regulators from legislators, that it's expected. Recently, we saw the letter, of course, from certain bipartisan legislators to the prudential bank regulators, right, in respect of SAB 121.
Yep.
But we've heard of some new letters that have come out to 3 different industry bodies from Elizabeth Warren recently. And I'd love for you guys to just walk us through what this is and what you think about it.
Yeah, so we talked about this in prep a little bit. I was a bit shocked, and these are other trade associations all in Washington, D.C. And they've been very, very active. And for the audience, and Josh, you and David know this, we're not a lobbying organization. We don't employ lobbyists, so I don't envy the work that they have to do. But I think the publicly available letter that Senator Warren sent really emphasized and tried to push back on the idea that the work of these organizations in D.C., which is good work that we can see, is meant to undermine national security and help organizations evade the Bank Secrecy Act and basically prohibit or stop legislation that would protect national security and protect against illicit finance. I think that's a bit of overreach or over an extension of the ideological perspective, right? So you mentioned it earlier, Josh, when a Chair Gensler gets a letter or knows of a letter coming from Senator Warren or someone else, ideologically they're working towards the same goals, right? But when you see the outreach go to other associations that are legitimately trying to have a conversation in the ecosystem, they have the right to do that. As organizations in the United States, as citizens of the United States, they have the right to do that. So it was a bit scary to see that in the news. Like, that's supposed to chill efforts at legitimate discourse in Washington about some of these things. No one that we know, certainly no one here, is saying, yes, we should avoid Bank Secrecy Act. Things that are illegal should be protected against. Investors should be protected as well. But the idea that any effort to have the conversation about this is undermining national security, that seems like a bridge too far to me.
Yeah, agreed. David, what do you think? Do you agree?
I personally find these letters to be really distasteful and undermining what our sort of legislative and sort of political system is all about. My belief is, like when we saw Gary Gensler, kind of warn outside lawyers about, too vigorously defending their clients. This is really akin to me to really kind of coming up with an excuse because you don't like that people are pushing back, and really smart, well-informed people are pushing back and getting organized, and as the senator or as a regulator, really just not liking the fact that they're taking positions opposite to them. And this whole Hamas financing through crypto has just been so overblown. I think ultimately we were talking, under $1 million that could really be defined that was by crypto. And I think people really need to focus on the fact that, yes, there's anonymity with crypto transactions, but whenever you need a fiat gateways are where the AML and the BSA takes place.
Yep.
And so there's not this notion that, all this stuff can go on and there's no off ramp. There has to be an off ramp for some fiat. You're not, people aren't being able to finance these, like Hamas financing these terrible things that they're doing. With crypto solely, they need to convert into fiat, and the fiat on ramps are really the place where you see AML and KYC. And I think we can all agree that if somebody's passing a suitcase of hundreds, from a trunk of a car to another trunk of a car, nobody's running them through World Check to see if there's sanctioned people sharing this money going back and forth. So it's just disappointing to me, and it just doesn't feel very genuine.
Can I add one thing to that, Josh, if you don't mind? And one of the things that disturbs me about it, and I try not to make it a political conversation because it happens on every side of the aisle. David, this is in light of data and news that showed that the statistics quoted for terrorist financing leveraged crypto were actually incorrect. And granted, a penny going to terrorist financing is terrible, but it feels like politicians and folks in Washington who are anti-crypto will push a narrative even when some portions of the narrative have been disproven.
And
go ahead. No, go ahead, Josh. please.
No, I was just going to slightly, bring something else in, which is this idea, this bill, this proposed bill by Elizabeth Warren, the Digital Asset Anti-Money Laundering Act. And I just wonder whether in light of that, um, maybe maybe the letters, I just wonder how much of them are actually out of concern and how much of them are really a method of promoting a view consistent with this bill.
You know, I agree, Josh. And I think one thing that I find personally disappointing is that, these are elected officials. Like, candor is very important. What you're saying in congressional hearings and what you're representing to people who represent, the American public and the voters. It's basically going into, an open hearing and saying, false facts in front of a big, hearing of our, Congress people. And it just seems like, and I'll tie it into the court case in Utah where the SEC, is potentially being sanctioned for providing false evidence in a case against an individual and getting a temporary restraining order off the back of it. Like, it's very important that we can trust what our regulators, what our legislators, the facts that are being presented, whether it be in court, whether it be in Congress. And it's really important to fact check what's going on. And I think everybody, regardless of their views on different positions, really need to get comfortable with sharing the correct information and not taking liberties with it just to, support a position.
And Ron, how much of this do you think may have to do with 2024 being an election year?
Oh God, I feel like, shout out to Dina and Adam. We need them on this call. And we do our policy updates every month starting again in January, Josh, as you know. I think a lot of this is driven by the upcoming election and the optics related to that upcoming election. And I'm not a politician. I don't get the mechanics of it. Yeah, I'm sure I don't ever want to get the mechanics of it, but a lot of this is posturing as well. Because when you look at some of the analysis, and Dina and Adam do a great job of this, others do a great job of this as well, you see them comment and say this legislation has no chance whatsoever. But it's positioning them for electoral changes that may happen. We don't know what's going to happen in 2024. It looks like, sadly, the Supreme Court's going to have to weigh in again, potentially, about who can or cannot be on a ballot, which, again, the mechanics of is frightening. So, yeah, I think a lot of this is based on the politics of it and how they position themselves, depending on what happens in the election of 2024.
Look, one other thing that's gone on is, the Coinbase and a few other parties announced this super PAC that they've created and financed to lobby for, the crypto views and lobby for, make sure that, crypto's voice is being heard. One thing I will tell both of you is I've heard this anecdotally from several donors on the Democratic side, that they're being very specific about that their donations to support the Democratic Party are not donations to support this anti-crypto stance that the Democrats are taking.
Interesting.
And I know, look, we know each other very well. We're in a sort of little bit of our crypto echo chamber, but a lot of people think that, I think a lot of people are going to be tying some of their support in these elections, to some of the issues that are very important to them.
Thanks, David. And it looks like we have a question in the chat, question for David, saying there's a narrative out there that Ethereum is essentially going to become a monopoly in this space because, and we're waiting
That's our last guest, by the way.
Yes.
To see what our friend Casper will be adding in the because. But without the because yet, just in the interest of time, do you think that, in your view, is there this narrative, and what do you think of it?
Well, look, I think there's this really robust ecosystem that's been built off on top of Ethereum and ERC20 tokens. And you have a first mover advantage, and a lot of, traditional players have been working with Ethereum and playing with Ethereum and finding ways to incorporate it. So, look, I think I've been a fan of Ethereum since I helped Ethereum get listed in 2016 on an exchange. I've been a big fan of it and what it can be. So I think that so Casper put the second part of the question in there, and it's basically the more capital and the more Ethereum and funding towards the ecosystem funds more devs and funds more products on the ecosystem. I think like with everything else that there's going to be, a few protocols that will be sustainable. And I really think Ethereum will be one of them. And, a lot of people are very bullish on Solana, so that might be another one. Avalanche is another one where people are really, bullish about. And I think there'll be several. And I think, maybe they'll become niche in a certain way. Maybe Ethereum will be the sort of broad network for crypto in general and blockchain in general. But then you could have maybe avalanches for gaming and sort of gaming ecosystems. Or there are other projects, there are a few other projects I really like a lot that, are focused on gaming. And so we could see some that are focused on different subsectors, or, see a few and like different companies using the ones that they like.
Yeah,
I
really,
gotta
go
I
ahead.
got to chime in there on one thing, Josh. I'm sorry, because David, I don't necessarily disagree with you, but I think the big force multiplier for the industry going forward, you will need some level of cross-chain interoperability
That's
in
exactly
the
what
long term. That's the parallel to the fiat on-ramp, off-ramps that you had mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I realized the question wasn't directed at me, but I personally believe in a multi-chain future. And
Casper wants you to answer as well. Don't worry.
yeah, as Ron was mentioning, and as I believe David probably thinks as well, but correct me. I mean, I think interoperability will become, increasingly important, because while we likely will have some continued powerful, ecosystems within the digital asset space, I think, yeah, unless we just want silos evermore, interoperability is going to be key.
Yep.
And Casper says absolutely. So I'm not sure who he's saying that to, whether it's to David,
He's
Ron.
absolutely agreeing with me.
But
Well,
thank
look,
you for your
and look, I think innovation is amazing in our space, and like I'm a big fan of Ethereum. I'm a fan of some of the other protocols, but you never know. Like next year with AI and development and a different lens of things, there might be some other protocol that comes really out of the shadows, good shadows, and has great features and maybe more scalable and less gas fees. And
That's
so
the
it's a possibility.
That's the really interesting thing about you, David, and we talk about this a lot, and I'm just sharing this with the audience. The thing that, Josh, that and I know David does is he digs into the details of what are these platforms doing, what's their use case, what are they meant to do, which is very different than, sadly, what a lot of people will do, which is, oh my God, this is going up, let me buy it because I might be able to turn $100 into $10 million. And David, kudos to you because that's education for everyone in the ecosystem. Just understanding what it's meant to do and the dynamics of it is it's critical research. It reminds me of the old fundamental research that you'd have to do back in our early days on the street.
Look, I think it's so important to really use the protocols and whatever level it is. I'm not saying have to mint things and go that far, but like like go on them and figure out what they're doing and how it works, and what do you think is good about it, what is bad about it, and and it's not only that we all have techie friends, so if there are places where you hit walls, you can ask one of your techie friends to sort of what their view is. And I think I really like X. I've always liked Twitter and now
Yep.
X for our space, because I think there's so many different views and so many people feel comfortable, talking about the pluses and minuses of different protocols. I think it's a really great space just to read what different views on things and, form your own.
So I see we have another comment, with a very provocative question. So it says, Ray, Democrats' anti-crypto stance. Isn't there a real concern / risk around the devaluing of the US dollar and the economic implications of that with regard to crypto? Would a digital dollar solve for all this?
David can go first.
I was going to say, Josh, what do you think?
I mean, I I think there are many things that concern me. About a CBDC in the US, including relating to privacy. So I don't necessarily know that us developing or launching, because certainly things are in development and have been worked on for a long time, launching a CBDC necessarily keeps the US dollar from being devalued. Certainly, other countries already have central bank digital currencies in some respects. And I don't necessarily think that, I don't know. I guess I should be careful how I answer this, but my personal view is they may do things and we may decide that there are some risks that have to do with civil liberties and other kinds of considerations. And so I think it's a balance.
Just to, if I could, I don't think the devaluing of the US dollar, first of all, that's a multi-generational conversation. The dollar's not going to disappear in our lifetimes, in my mind, as, the world's reserve currency. But the things that devalue the dollar are really the macroeconomic issues that we're facing. $33 trillion in debt. David, I know you and I've chatted about this, and that's not even including the data that no one talks about, the long-term unfunded liabilities. I think if you include all pensions, all Social Security, you're looking at $100 trillion over the next 20 years or so. So I just feel like the idea that crypto will devalue the US currency, crypto and blockchain are innovations. What we do with that is on us. You're on mute, buddy.
All our deficit spending year over year
Yeah.
is what's devaluing the dollar.
Yeah.
All the printing of money. And look, when COVID happened, it's fair to say that, the government took the view of printing this money and adding liquidity in the system because they felt it was necessary to support, the economy. And whether you disagree or agree with that, there was a reason. There was a valid reason for it. How it was done, the mechanics of it, but like the three of us can't just have like an open, budget and be in the negative year after year after year. Like at some point, you're not going to be able to get another loan, and you're not going to be able to get another credit card. And just because we have the ability to print money, it doesn't change the facts on the ground. And so, I think some people would say that a digital currency may be a way to blunt crypto, and that some of the cool features of crypto would be in that digital currency, but it doesn't deter from the fact that a dollar today isn't worth what it is tomorrow. It's worth less, and there's more dollars going into the system. So I think fundamentally, until we stop deficit spending and sort of try and get this under control, that's really what will devalue the dollar.
I have to add one thing to that. And we've been in this space for a long time. I have not seen yet a potent enough reason for a central bank digital currency that makes sense in my mind. And that I may not understand the full mechanics of it. And there's a certain kind of irony to hearing certain regulators saying, we don't need crypto. We've got the dollar is digital, the yen is digital, the euro is digital. But governments are happy to talk about a central bank digital currency. And I think that really flies in the face of, people deserve financial privacy in some way. And I'm not saying violating the law or fraud. Yes, those are crimes. And, crimes should be protected against and prosecuted. But I don't see how a CBDC helps. And I could be missing something, but.
Yeah. I mean, I think one thing that would be really bad is, if there is some level of government control, what happens if you want to make a donation to an opposing party? Let's say the Democrats are in control right now and you want to make a donation to the Republicans. Like, does some authority potentially prevent that from happening and censor other things? Even things that are legal in certain places. We don't want you to do online gaming anymore, and so we're just not going to let you use your money for that, or send money overseas to places that not on sanctions list, but we don't want you to send money to some third world country for whatever reason, even if you have family there. There's just so many things that could get undone, and you lose control over your finances. It just it gives a lot of people pause.
In talking about the deficit and things like that, I mean, one of the things that often comes to mind is just the lowering of the ratings of our debt, In part because of our inability in Congress, you know, to get things passed. And certainly, I think the lack of a speaker for a period of time this year definitely plays into that kind of thing. So a lot of times people are focused on, okay, is crypto is crypto causing harm to the dollar or something like that? But I think, as you guys have been saying, there are many other factors that I believe play much more of an immediate risk and much more of a risk.
And Josh, it's funny as you raise that. I think I was listening to the Bloomberg government. I believe it was the source. They had noted that this Congress only passed 22 laws, and the previous Congress passed several hundred. So it's just interesting to see that inability to get things done and how many different industries it harms.
So what are our predictions for 2024?
You want me to go first?
You go first,
Yes,
Ron.
please.
All right. So I'll try not to name specific numbers. I think Bitcoin this coming year will break its prior all-time high, and I think it'll do it by a notable margin. And we've seen the quotes. Kathy Wood and ARK and some other some other firms have put forward $100,000 per Bitcoin price targets. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility in the coming year. I think some of the meme coin stuff that we're seeing, David, you might disagree with me on some of them, is a little too frothy. I think we'll see some liquidity taken out of those post the new year. Sadly, I don't think much is going to happen Washington, D.C. wise throughout the new year as well. But I think one other thing that we're going to see a lot more of, David, and I think this is something we chatted about previously, I think the impact of gaming and Web3 and its engagement in crypto and blockchain, that's going to be a game changer in 2024. I think that's when the marketplace really begins to see, we've been not joking, we've been talking about it for the past 8 or 9 years. What's the use case for crypto? What's the use case for crypto? We're going to be seeing Web3 and IoT and gaming really push forward that use case in a usable way for people. And I'm planning to do more events for the WSBA, obviously, in the coming year. And yes, we will be visiting Washington, D.C. That's where I'm stopping on predictions, Josh.
Thanks. And David, what about you?
So, well, I think we will see a Bitcoin ETF approved. I think we'll see an Ethereum ETF approved. I do think Bitcoin will touch 6 figures by the end of 24. And I just think, Ron said some of the things. I really think that certain themes this year will come to play. I believe gaming is a very powerful theme, and that there are more and more games being built on different protocols. And I just see that it's a really elegant use case for it. I think we're also going to see more real world assets starting to be tokenized.
Yep.
Some of these tokenized mutual funds and so I think we're going to see some more tangible use cases. And, I will say on the political side that if we were to see the Senate flip to the Republicans, that I think the brunt of the regulatory discord will be behind us. I don't think that if we have a repeat administration with the House and Senate being in one position, I think it'll be much more difficult to block, moving forward in our space. I don't think the president would really want to block innovation in our space, especially if it gets passed by Congress. I don't know if that's a veto you want to have. I know again we're in our sort of echo chamber a little bit, but I think that the more real world cases that come to market and use, the more people will come along that this really makes a lot of sense.
And that's in the wake of the international stuff too. We didn't even get a chance to talk about it, but the UK recently approved a digital securities sandbox. They're other countries are far ahead of us in many regards.
Yeah. What do you think, Josh?
Yeah.
So, trying not to duplicate what you guys have said, because I think those are great predictions. I do think we will continue to see an increasing focus on national security. I agree about gaming, and I actually think the interplay with AI, not just for gaming, where it's been for a while, because you've had non-player characters for a long time, right? But really coming to the next level. I also think just AI being integrated in general with digital assets and with the digital asset industry can lead to a lot of great, exciting things, and potentially also to some scary things. If we think about, white papers written by AI and digital assets launched by AI, and if we think about, say, a 2017 ICO boom done by crypto, I mean, by AI, I mean, different kind of world. But I think it's a net extreme positive for the industry, and I think also just thinking about where we go. I'm excited to see some of the outcomes of some of these already long fought, it seems, battles
Yeah.
between and among industry participants and regulators, and really trying to understand market structure, where we end up with that, and really trying to have like a firm base that we can further grow from.
I want to add one thing, and this is a little bit of a shameless plug for our colleagues, but I do want to say that 2023 really showed the power of some of the lawyers and the thinking in our space, and the members of the WSBA who have participated in some of these really, big ticket litigations. And I don't want to, I don't want to call out people, because otherwise then I'm going to forget somebody and I don't want to leave anybody out. But I really think that the practice has been elevated by a number of the people in our group. And, I'm really very impressed by whether it be amicus briefs or just arguments being made and creativity. And it's really, yes, it's really top flight work. And, I want to just take a moment to acknowledge all of that.
Yep. And if I could, this is our last broadcast of the year. We'll be taking a little bit of time off and jumping right back into it. I just want to say, David and Josh, you've been friends and colleagues for many years. You chair working groups. Josh, you're on our board. I could not imagine two better co-hosts and colleagues in this space, and I just want to personally thank you both. You are both amazing, and I literally learned from you, like so many other members, just every single time I chat with you both, and I'm just so grateful.
I feel the same way about you guys.
Yeah, I thoroughly enjoy these conversations, and I really hope people, who listen, just get a different viewpoint from us. And I'm really looking forward to doing this with both of you next year and going forward.
Thanks for everyone who provided comments and questions today.
Yes, thank you for all the comments. More in-persons next year. If anyone needs information, info@wsba.co. David, Josh, you're both the best. Have a very happy holidays and a very happy new year.
Thank you.
Yes.
You too,
Take
guys.
care, everyone.
Bye.